Hi, I'm Catherine Ayers-Wickenhauser, Director of Communications at Direct Trust, and I'm so excited to be joined by James Bateman from MedChart today. So welcome, James. You've recently been named one of our interoperability heroes, and will you tell us more about yourself and about MedChart?
Well, hi, Catherine, and thank you for having me on today. First of all, I'm super honored to be selected as one of the interoperability heroes. We really love working with Direct Trust, and I think what you guys are doing and the organization you're running is really having an impact on improving access to data. So, yes, thank you for this honor. So my name is James Bateman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of MedChart. We're a company which is connecting health information based on consumer-mediated exchange. So focused on all of the complexities around patient identity, consent and authorization, and aggregation of that data from all sorts of different data sources that an individual may have that data stored at. So we've been in business for about 5 years now, and we were built from actually a personal experience that I had with my family when my father-in-law passed away, and the challenges that our family had coordinating his health data when he was being seen at many health institutions. And we had home care agencies coming in, family caregivers pitching in. And we realized, there's a real opportunity here to allow patients to use their consent and authorization to enable a new mode for data interoperability that's not really widespread at scale in the healthcare system today. And that's what we're doing.
Awesome. It's so interesting to hear because I think everyone who really steps into that patient or care partner advocacy role has exactly the experience that you described of going through the system and figuring out what's broken and trying to identify it and then be part of the solution. And so I'm curious from your perspective, generally when we've been talking about interoperability the last 5, 10 years, there's been a lot of emphasis on exchange between care providing organizations or EHRs. And historically, there hasn't been a lot of emphasis on the patient, and consumers weren't really included in a lot of those conversations. So can you tell me what your take on that is from your experience?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. I think one of the things that has been very curious is that, it hasn't been part of those mainstream conversations. And I say curious because there's three modes of data exchange that are widely accepted. There's the query-based exchanges that's very similar to what we see with the health information exchanges that are broadly across the US. There's the directed exchanges, which, direct exchange and direct trust is a huge proponent of. And then there's the consumer-mediated exchanges, which are recognized, and there's been tons of research and development on them, but they haven't necessarily been done at scale. And I think that's because involving the consumer in the process is a little bit more of a difficult problem because it introduces new challenges by having a third party participant in the exchange of data from the sources to the healthcare provider or to the entity that needs it. So when you're dealing with trying to make improvements within the healthcare system, it makes a lot of sense logically to figure out the most efficient way for a doctor or a care provider or a member of the circle of care to get access to that information with the least barriers.
Mhm.
And when you have the privilege of being a care provider for a certain individual, then you may be able to use that privilege to get access to that data without them having to explicitly or expressly consent. But we're moving into a world now where the use cases and the number of possibilities that can be unlocked where value from this data could deliver a better patient experience or a better outcome are going beyond those sort of traditional ways that we think about care delivery. And now you need to provide individuals with that option to consent and authorize that data to flow. As well as, I mean, there's been a large push in recent years with things like GDPR to have more transparency and visibility directly to the consumer and the end user. So, I mean, up until this point, I think there's just been so many challenges that would deliver great value in healthcare that solving the care and treatment use case, not necessarily directly involving the patient, has been a great logical first step to see some results. And now we're just getting to that age and that level of maturity, I think, where that conversation needs to expand. And that's where, MedChart and what we're doing from the interoperability side is we're really providing that interface between these great systems and networks that have been built through health exchanges, direct exchanges, et cetera, with this new paradigm of consumer mediated exchange, because I think that we don't need to rebuild everything from scratch. We can leverage all the technology we built and now layer on the consumer participation, their authorization, trusted identity consent methodologies to unlock a lot of the data and the infrastructure for this additional use case that, maybe it wasn't originally designed for.
Mm-hmm. And I really like something you just said about the circle of care, and that phrase. And that to me really conveys the trust and the many different people, including the patient, including care partners and other people who are involved in that care overall. And so, you mentioned some of the different types of exchange and different networks. And so I'm curious if you can maybe tell us what the progress has been to date on consumer mediated exchange, and then also what are networks or other organizations doing to participate in this effort?
Absolutely. I think when we're thinking about the progress of consumer mediated exchange, it's good to think about it from the perspective of understanding it's been around for a very long time. So ever since you as an individual have been able to walk into a clinic and say, give me a photocopy of my file, consumer mediated exchange has been a part of our everyday life in healthcare. Because that is the essence of it. It's not pretty, but it works, and it's using the patient consent. They're setting a directive. They're saying, "Give me a copy. I want to use it for my own purpose," and it has all the elements. I think the problem is that we haven't really figured out a way to do it operationally at scale. So we're still relying on these older methods that don't scale well and are very expensive or high touch to, to facilitate consumer mediated exchange. And there's a huge opportunity here that if we are able to do this at the same scale of, let's say, what we're seeing in state or national level health information exchanges, it can open up tremendous innovation opportunity. So when we're seeing how the market is progressing right now, what we're seeing is everybody everywhere needs to comply with, HIPAA authorized requests from patients, and they have their own methodology for complying with those. And then we've seen the evolution of things like patient portals, as well as some private companies that have come in to facilitate the consent process and connected this data, but it's still very fragmented and still early days, I would say. One thing that we're really hopeful in seeing this paradigm come to scale is around what's been going on with the 21st Century Cures Act and the CMS interoperability rule. Because this is now the government coming in to say, consumer mediated exchange is an important part of what we need to support with technology in the healthcare system. So asking now all of the healthcare providers to respond to patient authorized requests with API HL7 FHIR-based responses is absolutely game changing. And where now we're going to see that emergence of being able to do consumer mediated at scale.
Awesome. So it sounds like there's a lot to look forward to. And thinking about that too, with the 21st Century Cures Act that you just mentioned, organizations obviously are working to comply with that. But how do you see the impact of 21st Century Cures, or what might be next for the future? What do you think that looks like?
Absolutely. I think when we're thinking about the impact of 21st Century Cures Act, there's two things that I think about looking at the picture. One is what's the pathway that we're seeing and the trends we're seeing different healthcare providers take in terms of meeting their compliance requirements. And then the second path is if that all goes according to plan, what are the great opportunities that open up? Where now we can use, let's say, consumer-mediated exchange to power innovation in ways that previously were just not possible. So if I talk about the first one, where how are healthcare institutions implementing and meeting their compliance requirement, I think it's what we're seeing is everyone is getting bombarded from all of their advisors, all of their memberships and organizations, and their EMR vendors. Everybody's reaching out to extend an olive branch to say, hey, this is something impending that we're going to have to support. Is we want to help you out. We want to help you figure out how to become compliant. So I'm very optimistic that in terms of the timelines set out, we are going to see mass adoption and compliance with the 21st Century Cures Act because there's just so much support for all of the providers that have to bring this in. Now, that being said, since the support is coming from so many different sources, I don't see it really solving the fragmentation issue. I think there's a lot of ways that you can, and different pathways that you can take to sort of get to that end compliance result. And we're going to see healthcare providers across the US take many different pathways. So it's going to really, intensify the need for a company such as MedChart, who's bringing in interoperability with all of these endpoints, aggregating them, deduping, making that data accessible, useful, and leveraging technologies like Direct Trust in order to speak to those endpoints. I think Direct Trust has a huge role in what's going on in terms of how these healthcare providers are implementing. So and I say that because from the healthcare provider side, they could become compliant by simply implementing electronic release of information tools through using your direct exchange. Now, when once we see the market by the end of next year come into play, where now everyone's sort of figured out how they're complying with patient authorized requests, responding with HL7 Fire APIs, that's where you're going to need a partner such as MedChart that can come in, bring all this information together, make it digestible to like a service, an app, a healthcare provider that wants to just have one simple entry point to be able to get access to all of it. And that's where the second part of the answer to this question comes in, is what type of opportunity for innovation does this really unlock? If you can imagine a future where someone is engaging with some sort of health tech app, promising them, some benefits either around, like, let's say diabetes or medication management or chronic disease management. And this app would allow them to be able to get that benefit if it had a full understanding of their medical history. That's where you're going to see this future, where now they can just permission that app to have access to that data. And that data will be pulled directly from the EMRs of their healthcare providers with their consent, provided their identity is verified, all of those boxes are checked. And that's not a world that we live in today. There's a few small app marketplaces that might be attached to specific EMRs, but those are restricted to only the data that's available in that ecosystem. And this is really going to just open it up across system-wide. And we're going to see that next wave of innovation, I think, be sparked on the back of CMEs going to scale.
Awesome. And, noting that you just said that this isn't really the world that we live in today yet, but it might be in the future. What would you say that members of the industry, organizations, people, individuals in health IT, what can they take away from today's conversation to advance consumer-mediated exchange and this use of interoperability?
So I think if I were to, put one message out there to take away and to think about for those industry members, it would be to really just have an open mind. I think, this is obviously a big change. And I think that a lot of institutions have already made the leap when sort of, that mental leap of, okay, we're going to expose and be more transparent to the patient in terms of like their information when they adopted things like patient portals. So I think that laid the groundwork from sort of a cultural point of view of making that more acceptable. Now, this is the next level of not only is that data going to the patient portal you control, but it's going to whatever other app or service that the patient authorizes and wishes it to flow to. So I think having an open mind to continue to embrace that culture of transparency and openness with your patients. At the end of the day, what's going to happen is they will trust you more because you will be a partner in their care and not just someone who's simply delivering it. And they're really going to see that and view that as you looking out for their best interests versus, maybe them thinking you're just trying to keep them in your ecosystem. So building that, I think it'll be really instrumental to building that trust. So having an open mind, embracing it, and just sprint to the finish to do this as quickly as possible is going to put you at the head of the pack of something that at the end of the day is inevitable and I think is just ultimately very beneficial for patients and outcomes across the entire healthcare system.
Yeah, certainly, a lot to think about, a lot to be excited for the future too, and what this might look like as we all come together and advance interoperability and really try to drive, better patient experience, better outcomes, decreased healthcare costs, of course. So this has really been a great conversation. And I'm curious if you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the listeners today.
No, I mean, I think we've captured it well in the questions that we have, having that open mind and really embracing consumer mediated exchange. I think with that culture, there's a lot of barriers that we can break down a lot quicker in this transition. So it's just overall, though, I just want to thank you again for having me, and it's an honor to have received this award. And it's a pleasure being part of this community.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Congratulations again on being recognized as an interoperability hero. And to view more spotlight interviews like this, check out the Interoperability Hero section on the Direct Trust website.